Thanks for taking the time to join us today for another training. It is always good to learn from the vast research and knowledge Dana has to share. Let's join Dana in progress.
So the lymphatic system is part of the circulatory system. It's kind of like the subsystem or the sewer drainage system of the circulatory system. And a lot of people, when you say the lymphatic system, they have no clue that it's attached to the circulatory system. And so in order to understand that, we have to kind of walk through it and really look at all the parts, because it becomes so integral. And when someone has a lymphatic problem or a lymphatic collapse, or they have a breast removed or something like that, they have to retrain the lymphatic pathways. There's a whole lot to it. You go in for a deep tissue massage. What are you actually doing to your lymphatic system? There's just a whole lot of stuff that you need to understand when it comes to the lymphatic system. And so we're going to go through the parts and kind of understand how they all flow and how they all hook together. And then we're going to talk about how the lymphatic system gets all messed up and is not draining correctly, or is not working, or is compromising your immune system, because it all plays to the immune system also. So we're going to go through it in several different ways over the next 2 weeks. But when we get done, you'll get a recipe at the end that actually will show you what literally can take you to chronic disease from the lymphatic system being offline. So that's what we're going to do there to kind of help you out.
A recipe to take us to chronic disease?
A recipe
for the liver being offline?
Yeah, for the system being offline. A recipe. If this system is offline, you just plug this recipe in and you go right down it and see what has failed, so you can correct that.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of cool. All right, let's see. What am I doing? Oh, I'm sharing my screen. There it is. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. Just give me a nod, Sherry, if you can see my screen. All right, thank you. And we have Sherry and Brad out in the other part of the building. They are our co-hosts tonight, keeping things going for us. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, lymphatic system is part of the circulatory system and the immune system. So when the lymphatic system goes down, you have 3 systems that are in jeopardy. And when you have 4 systems in jeopardy, disease manifests.
Oh.
So you have a real situation going on here. So let's just kind of walk through this a little bit. And before we jump into the anatomy and physiology, let's just talk about a little bit of paradigm shift. Sometimes we have to make a shift within ourselves to make things really happen correctly. So
you make me make those all the time.
I don't twist your arm. All right. So from treatment,
twist my brain.
Twist your brain. Okay. So what we're doing is we're going to move this paradigm from treatment to prevention. We want to stay away from treatment and we want to go to prevention, because once you get to treatment, now you've got a situation you don't want to be in. So we've got to be reactive. We got to go from reactive to proactive. So treatment to prevention and reactive to proactive. So prevention, proactive, the 2 P's, okay? And it's essential for developing a high performance living. If you don't do that, you will not have high performance living. And so this high level of wellness results by fulfilling the physical, mental, emotional conditions of health. And that is so important. We've talked about that a lot over the weeks, that we need to really look at not only the physical, but the mental and the emotional aspect of health, because emotion has such a huge amount. You can have a complete lymphatic collapse emotionally. Emotion is the one that triggers that. So as a result of realigning our lives and our vision to a higher purpose for ourselves, we now can take responsibility for our own health. And that's what's so important here, guys. So let's look at some statistics in the United States. United States is #1 in degenerative diseases. 58 million people have high blood pressure today in America. 12 million diabetics in our country. Less than 50% of the kids in junior high can do 1 chin-up. It's kind of scary. Workers' compensation pays $40 billion on pain-related claims every year. $38 billion a year in prescription drugs. So just think about $38 billion a year in prescription drugs. Let's just take 1% of that to your business for essential oils. Just 1% of that $38 billion. You're going to help people not have that problem, okay? Obesity in children are up 54%, which will show up later with degenerative diseases later on in their life. And every day, 4,000 people die from cancer or heart disease every single day. So are you one of these statistics today? We have to kind of take a look at this. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, but expecting different results. And that's what our health, or well, I should say our sick care system is about. It is doing the same things over and over and over.
Our sick care system.
Expecting different results. And so you can see, literally, look at this. 2001, look at how this has escalated the cost of healthcare. Look at that. Isn't that crazy? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, the only different results we're getting is it's costing more to be sick. And it's crazy. We should really stop that. So we want to really dig in now and really look at the circulatory system, because it's not just blood being pumped out there. And that's one of the things that people really get misled on. Your heart is a one-way pump only. Only. Please understand that. It is a one-way pump. That's why if you stand very still for a long period of time, you pass out, because blood's just being pumped out and it's not coming back, and you're going to have problems. But it's not just blood. When we say blood, we think, oh, blood's red. Well, there's a lot in blood, and so we're going to kind of look at this. So let's start first looking at the components of the circulatory system. We have heart, blood vessels, and blood. These are the structures and components that come from the circulatory system, which the heart is the central component, working as the motor. So remember that. It is the motor, one-way motor, pumping the blood out. So when we look at the heart is divided into 4 chambers. You have your right atrium, your right ventricle, your left atrium, and your left ventricle. It's about 60 to 90 milliliters, or 2 to 3 ounces of blood is pumped out every time the heart beats. So it starts to put things in perspective when you start looking at that. Now let's look at the blood. The blood is made up basically of 3 kinds of cells. You have your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your blood clotting platelets surrounded by plasma. So there you have it. You got your red blood cells, which are concave, your platelets, and your white blood cells. And then that's all has plasma circulating through it. So looking at the blood consists of a suspension of special cells in a liquid called plasma. In an adult man, the blood is about 1/12 of the body weight of the corresponding to about 5 to 6 liters. So if you want to lose weight, just cut your wrist. Okay, 1/12 of your weight will be gone real quick, okay? Blood consists of about 55% plasma and 45% cells called formed elements.
Make sure you have death insurance.
Yeah. So when you look at when you look at your blood, you can see there's a whole lot more to it than what you really think, guys. There's a lot to it, and we're going to dive in. So erythrocytes, or red blood cells, most commonly known as that, they're about 4 to 6 million mm times 3. That's their size. They are also called red blood cells, and in mammals, the erythrocytes are devoid of a nucleus. They have a bioconcave lens, and that is to be able to take on more hemoglobin that will carry the oxygen. In your birds and stuff, they actually have a nucleus, and so it's kind of funny. There's an essential oil company that was doing blood work, and they sent in this blood. It was funny because they do a blood analysis and say, oh, you need all these here essential oils to get better. So this guy sent in some blood, and it came back that it was, and on the demographic information, they said it was a 45-year-old woman, and but they sent in sent in chicken's blood.
Yeah.
So they came back and said, oh, you need all this here to take care of this breast cancer and blah 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 blah, because you got breast cancer. It was chicken blood. Anyone with a half a brain would see the nucleus as soon as they put it on the microscope, and they say, oh, this blood has been tainted, and then throw it out. So anyway, I'll just stop there.
It's not human blood.
It's not human blood, but it was a 48-year-old woman with breast cancer. Okay. So erythrocyte cells, these red blood cells, are rich in hemoglobin, a protein able to bind in a faint manner to oxygen. Hence, the cell has a responsibility of providing oxygen to the tissue and the other parts of the body, and recovering the carbon dioxide that is produced as waste and taking it back out of the body. However, most carbon dioxide is carried by the plasma. This is something that a lot of people don't know. And it's in a form of soluble carbonates. And the red blood cells in mammalians are lacking, of course, the nucleus we talked about, because they need more room for the hemoglobin because that bioconcave shape. So it raises the surface area of the cytoplasmic volume ratio, and that's what's so important. So just understanding this kind of helps you out, because those red blood cells, there's going to come a point where we're going to be talking about trapped blood proteins, and that's why you need to know these different moving parts. So erythrocytes, you need to know how long they stick around. They only are about 120 days, and then they have to be recycled, and they literally go to the spleen, where they are retained by the spleen, and they are recycled where the process called apoptosis occurs. That's where they are recaptured, recycled, and remanufactured. It's very important. Actually, remanufacturing starts in the bone, finalized in the spleen, and then goes through the liver, and then away we go. Okay. So now let's look at the plasma. The plasma is slightly an alkaline fluid. It's typically a yellow color, a yellowish color. It consists of about 90% water and 10% dry matter. 9 parts of it is made out of organic substances, whereas 1 part is made up of minerals. Cell-free serum and plasma can be obtained by centrifuge, and so they literally take your blood and they draw it. They'll centrifuge it, and then that's where they'll get your different things that they'll start doing their testing on in the lab. So that's kind of what it looks like there. This here plasma is, like I said, 90% water, the retainer being, the other 10 being colloidal gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, etc., and proteins, hormones, and other constituents of blood besides blood cells. You actually, in the plasma, you can actually have things like proteins, albumin, globulins, clotting proteins, other dead cells. That's what you'll find in the plasma. So now let's take a look at the platelets. The platelets are very important for your body. The main function of platelets is to help blood to stop spewing out of your body. They help what's called platelet aggregation, so you don't bleed to death. And so the thing that's cool about this is it also releases serotonin, which reduces the diameter of the injury. Serotonin is not just a happy hormone or a happy neurotransmitter. It actually reduces the size of the wound, and it slows down the hemolytic flux or the blood flow. And then you have fibrogen that traps the cells in the platelets that form the clot on the surface so that the blood stops coming. So that's what's so important with the platelets. Platelets also, they appear in kind of a roundish shape in a way, but they also are not real cells. They are, when you do a smear on them, they have an intense purple color, and their diameter is about 2 to 3 unimeters or unimoles. So they're very small. They're much smaller than the erythrocyte, and their density in the blood is about 200,000, 300,000 unimoles times 3. So you can kind of see they don't really look so much like a red blood cell. Of course, your plasma is very fluid. So it just kind of gives you a real look there. So now let's look at some of the other things you find in the blood. Let's look at leukocytes, white blood cells. They're responsible for your defense mechanism and organization of the body. They are in the blood, and they are much less numerous than red blood cells. You don't have as much white blood cells in there, which is a good thing. If you have an elevated white blood cell count, it tells you have some kind of infection going on. That's why they'll test for that. Their density is a lot less, or quite a bit larger than the platelets. You can see they're 5,000 to 7,000 nanometers. So that's what they look like. Now, these leukocytes are divided into 2 different kinds of categories. You have your granulocytes and your agranulocytes. And the term granulocyte is due to the presence of the granules in the cytoplasm of the cell. And so you can kind of see in this picture right here, little dots, and we'll see a video here in a little bit that'll explain it a little bit more. So there's 2 different types of granulocytes. You have your macrophages, and then you have your T cells, your B cells and T cells, and your dendritic cells. So there's just kind of a lot of stuff here. These are all things that you need to know, because these are the things that will get trapped in the interstitium when the lymphatic system starts to collapse. So let's look at the leukocytes. Each type of leukocyte They're present in the blood in different proportions. So here's your agranular and then your granular. So you have your lymphocytes, or your lymphocytes, 20 to 25%. That's these guys right over here at the bottom and right here in this picture. And your monocytes, and we'll learn more about those. They're 3 to 8. Your basophils are 0.5 to 1%. These little guys, and each one of these here granular ones have a specific function. If you have a basophil that is larger than 1%, you'll have a parasitic infection, because when you have parasites, the basophils just grow like crazy in your body because they're trying to take out the parasites. The neutrophils are 60 to 70%. That'll tell you if you have a bacterial infection, and your eosinophils is if you have a viral infection. So they have a specific action in your body. So let's look at the neutrophils up close and how they work. They are very active in their phagocytosis of bacteria, very present in a large amount of pus. So if you have a lot of pus going on in your body, you'll see that. That's kind of the yellowy, greeny, like if you cough something up from your throat, it's going to be clear full of neutrophils because they're attacking the bacteria that's in your throat, or if you get a wound, it'll be attacking the bacteria there. Unfortunately, neutrophils are not able to renew their lysosomes used to digest the microbes after they die. So they have to be reproduced. They can't regenerate themselves. Your lymphocytes, you have the B lymphocytes, the T lymphocytes, and the NK cells, your neutral killer cells. Their main constituents are of the immune system, their defense against the attack of pathogen microorganisms such as viruses, bacteria, fungi, and procystis. They create antibodies and arrange them to protect you from further infections. And so this is all part of the stuff that is going to be flowing around your body and leaking from the capillaries and trying to be recovered by your lymphatic system and brought back. And that's why it becomes so important to know each one of these pieces as we move forward. Now, your lymphocytes here, they are really cool because they have all these little appendages here. And these appendages are so important because they're the ones that are going to be working on viruses. And I believe the next one will be a video here that you can kind of look at and see. They circulate through the blood, even in the resting state. They populate the lymphoidal tissue, and like your lymph nodes and things like that. And they circulate through the lymph system and the vessels, because that's where a lot of these bad viruses and things wind up going. And that's, well, a bubonic plague, for example, that's where it went, right into the lymphatic system and hung out there and took on the DNA of the lymph system. And yeah, that's why these little guys are so important. So they will be found in organs like the thymus, the bone marrow, spleen, lymphoids, nodes, tonsils, prior patches, respiratory gastrointestinal tract. It's really cool. And in the blood, the lymphocytes are about 20 to 40% of all the lymphocytes that you see larger than red blood cells. So these guys really do their job. And so next slide will be how they work. So now your antibodies, this is where you have this cool little Y chain situation to stop viruses. They bind themselves to the molecules and they create antigens as they go through this and protect you from future infections. So let's just kind of take a look at this here. It'll help explain it.
Activation of the immune response typically begins when a pathogen enters the body. Macrophages that encounter the pathogen ingest, process, and display the antigen fragments on their cell surfaces. Macrophages with antigen fragments displayed on their surfaces are called antigen-presenting cells. An antigen-presenting macrophage interacts with a T helper cell that can recognize the same antigen. During the interaction, the macrophage releases a chemical alarm signal called interleukin-1, which stimulates the T helper cell to secrete interleukin-2. Interleukin-2 causes the proliferation of certain cytotoxic T cells and B cells. The immune response from this point follows two paths, one using cytotoxic T cells and one using B cells. Normal cells of the body that become infected can also digest some of the pathogens and display antigen fragments on their cell surfaces. The body makes millions of different types of cytotoxic T cells. Each type is able to recognize a particular antigen. The cytotoxic T cells that are capable of recognizing the antigen displayed on the surfaces of infected cells bind to the infected cells and produce chemicals that kill the infected cell. Death of the infected cells results in destruction of the pathogen. B cells also come in millions of different types, each able to recognize a particular antigen. When B cells become activated by T helper cells, they differentiate into plasma cells. These plasma cells become antibody-producing factories, flooding the bloodstream with antibodies that can bind to the antigen involved in this infection. Antibodies bind to the antigens on the surfaces of the pathogens, marking them for destruction by macrophages. Some of the B cells do not turn into antibody factories, but instead become memory B cells that may survive for several decades. Because of these memory B cells, the secondary immune response to a future infection by the same pathogen is swifter and stronger. This powerful secondary immune response is what gives immunity to some diseases after you have had them once or after you have been vaccinated.
Okay. A light bulb went on.
Yes, a big one.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So this is called your adaptive immune system. It is part of the lymphatic system. It's your adaptive immune system that literally replicates quickly and rapidly. It produces antibodies. It identifies foreign cells for phagocytosis. That's what the B cells do. The T cells are part of the adaptive system also. They replicate very rapidly. They identify self from non-self. So now they know that this is a bad cell from a good cell. They produce memory cells that you just saw that they can last for decades.
It doesn't matter what the pathogen is.
Exactly. Even if it is.
It adapts.
It adapts, exactly. So that's
For
what,
decades.
yeah, not just for, yeah.
Yeah.
Activation of
All right. So now let's look at this video here on the granulocytes, the neutrophils, basophils, eosinophils. It will help you understand each one has a specific action in your body, and that because the blood plasma and well, the blood, let's just say blood is so involved in the lymphatic system, it's so important to understand how these work.
And all this just
Three types of
revolves.
white blood cells possess specialized lysosomes, which take up dyes of the right stain and are visible as granules under the microscope. These are known as granulocytes, the neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Two types do not have lysosomes which take up these dyes, and they are known as the agranulocytes, the lymphocytes, and monocytes.
All right, so understanding that, we look at neutrophils, typical the first responder. This is your first responder to any infection or inflammatory response, and they do phagocytosis, okay? Your basophils, least common because they do more with the parasites. There's less parasite infection than a bacterial infection. They're also an anticoagulant like a heparin, a blood thinner. They are present in the blood from clotting to specifying stuff. They are also a vasodilator or a histamine, which promotes blood flow to the tissue. Now your eosinophil production is a growth factor, lipid mediation, and it carries enzymes and cytokines. Cytokines is going to be your inflammatory response, and it also fights against parasites. So that gives you an idea how those cells function. So now let's go back to the macrophages. They are part of the system also. They're part of the adaptive and innate immune system. This is the immune system that you literally got from your mom. Okay, so important. Now macrophages is a Greek word called, which means big eater. So the macro means large, and the phagogen is eat, so they're a large eater. They stimulate the lymphocytes and other immune cells in the response to the pathogen. They attack foreign substance. They like infectious microbes, and they also attack cancer cells, and they go through destruction and ingestion of those cells, which now have to be taken out of the body, and that's part of the lymphatic system to take that out of the body. So you can kind of see how they kind of work together.
So it's possible that because of nutrition and I'm sure other things, you didn't get it from your mom.
You'll get a different amount from your mom. Some people get, mom was really had a good immune system and ate very well while she was pregnant, and she gave a great immune system to her children. Other parents that were not as healthy and did not care as much for their diet gave a poor immune system to their kids.
Which was my point.
Yep, exactly.
You didn't get a good immune system.
It's so important. I remember when Cammie became pregnant for the first time with Jason, I took her off sugar completely. About killed her because she was used to having a lot of cakes and stuff after every meal.
But that made it possible for her to give a better immune system.
But yeah, our kids had really good immune systems as we did that. So, and then once I got her off sugar, then it was easy to keep her off sugar. Sugar will destroy your immune system so quick. It's so bad.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 tablespoons of sugar will retard your immune system for 28 hours. And you probably eat more than 3 tablespoons a day with all the sugars in the food. So it's pretty sad. All
Does
right.
that have anything to do with the glycemic index then?
It does too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because rice is higher on the glycemic index than sugar.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you got to look at that. You got to look at that 2 ways.
Okay.
Sugar versus complex carbs.
Okay.
Complex carbs break down a whole lot different.
Okay.
We'll learn more about that in a little bit.
Okay.
So let's look at how these work in the body. Not only do they work in the immune system, but they attack the foreign substance. They're in all of your tissue, all of your living tissue. These guys are in there. They're everywhere in your body, and they have awesome functions of regeneration. They release inflammatory proteins, the 1A and the 1B, which attract monocytes to differentiate into macrophages, which become the main source of growth factors of cytokines. And so they are so important in your body. Okay, and these are the ones that you get from your mom. So now let's go back and start understanding blood proteins. We talked about the plasma and the other stuff. We've got to really look deeper into the blood proteins, because these are the ones that wind up trapped, what I call trapped blood proteins in the lymphatic system. This is where someone will go on a diuretic. And what does the diuretic do?
Open up the blood vessels.
It takes water out, but it doesn't take out the proteins.
A diuretic takes the water out, but not the protein. Okay.
Yeah. And so when you do that long enough,
diuretic. I was thinking of something else.
yeah, diuretic takes the water out.
Takes the water
It
out.
leaves the proteins behind. Now you got a problem. You'll see that as next week as we get into that. So let's look at this serum in the body.
I had a brain fart.
You had a brain fart. It is found in the tissue almost in every animal and human. In bacteria, it's also this here. Serum is also in bacteria and plants. It is manufactured by the liver, and major constituent of the human serum protein usually makes up 50 to 60% total of the body. Now, it has a rapid turnover and half-life, 19 to 21 days, and it's completely redone. It's very soluble, and these globular proteins are made up of a long chain of amino acids, which are highly molecular weight, 34 to 70 Daltons. Okay, so when you look at this plasma has at least 7%, and 58% of that 7% is albumin. Then there's your globulins, 38%, and then your fibrogens, which is 4%. And the fibrogens is what's going to help with the clotting factor. Okay, down in the formed elements in your red blood cells, you're going to have red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Look at that. That 45% are made up of these 3 items. So now you can start seeing that this blood and plasma and the proteins that are in the blood has a very integral part as it works into the lymphatic fluid, which we're going to talk about in a bit here. So look at the functions of this here serum in your body. This albumin helps the fluid regulation through osmotic pressure, nutrient transport, and waste removal. So this is the serum right here, and look what it does. It works as a free radical scavenging. It helps that whole process. It combines to help with transportation of nutrients to the cell. It inhibits platelet aggregation, so you're not going to just have clots everywhere. It's anti-inflammatory response, and it maintains blood colloidal osmotic pressure. If you don't have this going on, guys, you got some trouble. Okay, so that serum is so important. So that gives you all the components of the blood that's going to be making up your lymphatic system. So now if we look at the history, it's got a long history. Hippocrates started working on this way back in the day, clear back in the 5th century. And he talked about the lymph nodes and in one sentence of his work that he's doing. In the 3rd century, it was diagrammed a little bit more, and it was really actually incorrect. They thought it was all involved with the intestinal drainage system and the hepatic portal vein, and so it kind of went all over the place. But as we continue to go forward, it started to actually become defined into a spot that is really important today. They also found the lymph nodes in apes and pigs back in the 2nd century. And after death, the lymphatic system was mostly forgotten. So after these 3 guys right here died, it was mostly forgotten for about 1,600 years. It just wasn't that important. The Catholic Church had part of it here because they believed they forbid the study of the anatomy and considered that it was sinful if you studied the human body. So they kind of had a little part in suppressing that for a long time.
1,600 years worth.
1,600 years worth. And so then we get up in here and we found that this here gentleman here, he realized that a dog, the digestive tract, had a white filament going through it. When he cut into it, this milky stuff emerged. And so now they started realizing that there was something they called white veins. And this white, what is described now as chine, is the actual lymphatic fluid. And it is basically a fluid, plasma, with proteins. And we'll see more about that later on. Here's some more history coming up to 1874. This gentleman worked a lot on that. What he did is he injected mercury into the skin of the cadavers and traced the lymphatic vessels. Okay. He resulted in demonstrating lymphatic drainage based on anatomical location. So he started, okay, this drain, he found the watersheds and how they drain and how they move. And it was kind of cool. So when you look at the lymphatic system, you have you have your right lymphatic duct, your subclavial vein, your interjugular vein, the lymph nodes, thoracic duct, and lymphatic vessels. So these are the ones that we're going to be spending a lot of time with, as well as these are what they call the deep system, and then there is a surface system. So let's look at some interesting facts. In 1 in 8 women develop breast cancer. That's the statistics. 75% will seek traditional treatment. 45% will develop some degree of lymphedema 1 year post-surgery. 50 to 75% will develop lymphedema 5 years after surgery because they have not been trained how to retrain the watersheds. Incidence of lymphedema worldwide, 140 to 250 million people will literally have fibrosis, most common. 2 to 3 million secondary lymphedema and 1 to 2 million primary lymphedema, and other causes, the arthritis and on down that way. So they're just some interesting facts that they just don't realize that the lymphatic system is so important. So now we're going to start diving in a little deeper into the lymphatic system and really starting to, now that we know the components, we know the statistics and the history, we want to go right in and start looking at how the blood, literally, if you just sat still and didn't move, this is what the ancient Indians did. When they got ready to die, they just go build their burial stand, sit at the base of the stand, lower their breathing and not move, and they would die within 48 hours because all the blood would come out of their body and wouldn't come back to their heart, and their heart would stop and they'd die. And so how does that work? So understanding the capillaries is so important because this is where you literally bleed internally every second of every day. You literally bleed internally all day long. And that's what people don't understand. So understanding the capillaries, they do not contain any muscular fiber like you would think. There is a single layer of epithelial cell with some simple squamous epithelial around that. The average length is about 1 millimeter. Diameter is about 1 unimole. The blood cells pass through them in a single file, so they don't go through like a whole bunch at once. They're just single file all the time. They consist of arterial end and a venous end. So you can see that your arterial end is going to be red and your venous end is going to be blue. And so very important. So it comes right through right here. It has precapillary sphincters, which we're going to talk about later on. All capillaries stack end to end, which if you stacked them all end to end, they'd be 60,000 miles. So you have 60,000 miles of capillaries in your body, Steve. And if you weighed 400 pounds, you'd have 120 million. No, I'm just kidding. All right. 10 capillaries side by side is less than the width of a single human hair. 10 capillaries side by side. So that gives you a real idea how small these capillaries are and how small each red blood cell is. They stack up and go through single file through the capillaries. And as you look at the capillary here, this is where that red blood cell is going outside with the oxygen so it can get to the cells. Because how does the oxygen, the nutrients that the red blood cell carry, how does it get to every cell in your body if it stays in the arterial or the venous system? It has to come out and come back in somehow. And that's what we're going to talk about coming on here. So looking at the capillaries, they are semi-permeable. This means they allow a small amount of nutrients to be transported. So what do we mean by transported? So we have protein, minerals, fats, waters, oxygen, and other cells like hormones and things like that are going to come out of the capillaries. They're going to come out with oxygen and nutrient, feed the tissue into what's called the interstitium. And then they're going to, part of that is going to push back into the capillary. And we'll show you how that works in just a little bit here. So the larger molecules escape, but they cannot enter back into the capillaries. So this is so important, guys. This is where we now start understanding these big things we talked about in the beginning, all the different moving parts, how they have to come out of the capillary into the interstitium. Some of them are too big. They can't get back in. They have to be recaptured by the lymphatic system. That's why understanding all these parts becomes so absolutely important to understand. So now let's look at the anatomy of the lymphatic system. So we're going to talk first about the deep lymphatic system, the subfascial. Purpose is the draining of the lymph node of everything but. So this here is going to drain everything but skin, muscle, tendons, joints, and inner organs. So that's this is your deep system. And when this deep system gets destroyed, through surgery or something like that, you got trouble. Guys, you just flat have trouble. And then you have to retrain the watershed. And we're going to talk about that next week, retraining the watershed. It's so important. So this is the deep system. Now we have the superficial system. This is the one where if you've been in a car wreck, if you've been bucked off a horse, if you've been beat over the head with a rolling pin for getting into the cookie dough, if you've been to a massage therapist and had deep tissue massage, this system is involved. Okay, the purpose here is to drain the lymph node of the skin. Most lymphedema and lymph problems occur within the superficial lymphatic system. So we're not gonna just know that that's there. We'll talk about this. No, we'll talk about it partially this week, but more in depth next week, because that's where we really get you the recipe when this system gets collapsed. So let's look at the different different loads, the lymphatic loads that's going to happen in the body. It's going to go on. We're going to have water, protein, cells, long fat chains of fatty acids, minerals, cell debris, and other molecules. That's what's going to be in this interstitial area that we're going to start zeroing in on. Let's look at the water load. Only a fraction become lymphatic load when it comes to water. About 24 liters is filtered into the interstitial space every 24 hours. So 24 liters. What is there, 6 liters to a gallon?
No.
5.5. Yeah, 5.5
Yeah.
liters per gallon. And so how many gallons is being put into your body in a 24-hour period? Quite a bit. 80 to 90% is reabsorbed into the venous end of the capillary. So it's going to come out through the arterial side and go back in through the venous side. That's an easy exchange, 80 to 90%. So you're figuring 10 to 20% is not going to make it back into the venous side. And that's where you get water retention, and has to be recaptured through the lymphatic system. So if the lymphatic is down, why do people sometimes have huge water retention? They have to go on diuretics, is because their lymphatic system is in trouble, or their capillaries in trouble because of other things we'll talk about. So the remaining 2 to 4 liters every day in a 24-hour period has to return via the lymphatic system through the thoracic duct. So that's why it's so important to know how this all functions, so that you can actually start working to maintain your lymphatic system. Because if the lymphatic system is down, then you are literally a walking cesspool of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and so on, so on, so on. Okay. So looking at the protein load, guys, this is so important. Under normal conditions, the body maintains 7 grams of protein per liter of plasma. So 4 to 6 liters of blood is about 300 to 450 grams of protein. Consistently circulate through your blood. So protein overall concentration, again, you can kind of look at how it breaks down. The liver lymph protein is going to be this much in the blood. The interstitial protein is going to be your next highest. So you got it in your liver, you got it in and around the cells. So important, guys. I can't impress enough that you keep thinking about this in and around every cell of the body. That's what we're going to be focusing on next week in a huge degree. And it'll all make sense next week, but we have to lay this foundation or you'll be lost next week. Okay, and other body tissues is where you're going to make up the rest. So you can kind of see how this kind of comes together. 6-3-2 just gives you kind of an idea how that lays out here. So how does this all work? How do the proteins, minerals, fats, water, cells, how does this get into the interstitial space? This is where we're going to start drilling in, and you'll start understanding. This is your capillary areas. This here are the cells of your tissue. And the space in between that you see blue here is what is called the intercellular fluid, or the interstitial fluid, or the interstitial space. And if you get too much space between these cells, it's called hypohidrosis, and the cell dies. We're going to talk about that next week too. We don't have time tonight to talk about it. But this is where, guys, we wind up in a big trouble. And when you have this hypohidrosis going on, or water retention, they give you a diuretic. Inside of this here interstitial fluid, what do you have? I'll let you cheat, Steve, right here. What do you have?
Well, everything.
Proteins, minerals, fats, water, and other cell debris. So if they give you a diuretic, what comes out?
The water.
What's left?
All the rest.
And it doesn't move very well.
No.
And now you have death to those cells. Diuretics are horrible. Horrible. Because all they do is take out the water and leave all the other garbage behind. Well, I can't say it's all garbage. They leave it all behind. Now you have a very, very difficult time getting it out. And we'll talk about, that's the recipe for next week. Okay. So the interstitial fluid.
So we want to know what constitutes a diuretic that we might eat.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just go ahead, and because there's different ways that this here fluid gets out of the pathways and into the interstitial fluid. One is through diffusion. So this is the movement of molecules and particles from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. It's actually called osmosis. And then we have osmotic pressure. This is where pressure is needed to stop osmosis, the pressure that must be applied to a solution to stop osmosis. So this is where you'll see compression bandages and stuff like that. So let's just kind of listen to this video. It'll really help explain it.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and in this video I'm going to talk about interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid is a term that confuses students. If you you ask them, what is a capillary? They know that. They know what's in blood. They know what cells are, and the tissues are made up of cells. But if you ask them what interstitial fluid is, they're confused. And that's too bad, because that's going to be found between the capillary and the cells. And so what is it like, or what does it look like? Well, think about this. This doctor right here is doing arthroscopic surgery on a shoulder. And so how does that work? You've maybe seen videos of that. Well, they put a camera in, and then they're going to introduce fluid in there. But basically, what does it look like inside our body? If you take a camera and put it inside our body, it's not just blood everywhere. The blood is going to be confined to the blood vessels, but there's still going to be fluid inside our body. And what is that fluid? That fluid is called interstitial fluid. And so really, it's going to be what separates all of our cells from the circulatory system. Since we have a closed circulatory system, that means that the blood is going to be maintained within these vessels the whole way around the loops. But how does the material get out of the blood and eventually get into our cells? It goes through the interstitial fluid. And so if you visualize it like this, it's a fluid on the inside of our body that surrounds all the cells, then you're getting there. And so there's microcirculation that takes place at the level of the capillary. And so as the blood is flowing away from the heart, it will work its way down eventually to the capillary. And what holds the pressure inside a capillary? Well, there's going to be hydrostatic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure is going to be the pressure out on the capillary. It's pushing out. If you want to get an idea of what that really is, what is that hydrostatic pressure? Well, if you were young and you played with a hose when you're having a water fight, if you could ever get a hold of the hose and you put your finger on the front of it, you could increase that pressure and squirt it farther. And so that pressure on the inside of the capillary out on that fluid is going to be hydrostatic pressure. And that's going to move fluid outside of the capillary into the interstitial fluid around it. There's also going to be osmotic pressure. What's osmotic pressure? That's going to be water flowing in because we're going to have a higher solute concentration on the inside. So the combination of these two pressures, hydrostatic and then osmotic pressure, is going to create that blood pressure on the inside of our vessels. Again, it's going to be probably greater hydrostatic pressure on the capillary or on the artery side and less on the venule side. Where does the water go, though? When it leaks out, what's going to happen to this water or this fluid as it moves out? Eventually, it's going to move into what are called lymph vessels, and those lymph vessels will return that fluid to the blood. And so the major parts of the blood stay within the capillary, but the fluid is going to move between the two. And so I put together this little diagram to show you that. And so this is a capillary. So the capillary is going to be, if I were to ask you what it's made up of, the capillary itself is going to be made up of cells. And so the surrounding of the capillary, or that tube of the capillary, is going to be made up of endothelial cells. So it's going to be these really thin cells. What's on the inside then of our capillary? This is going to be plasma on the inside, and then we're going to have these red blood cells. We also have platelets in here, and we're going to have white blood cells as well. But if we're just talking about interstitial fluid, this plasma on the inside of our blood is very similar to the interstitial fluid. And so what's going to be in the interstitial fluid? Well, there's going to be a lot of water, but we're also going to have sugar, salt, hormones, neurotransmitters, carbon dioxide, oxygen. And so it serves as a conduit between the capillary and the tissues itself. And so what's a gas that the cells are going to consume? They're going to consume oxygen. How does it get there? Well, it's going to be consumed here in the mitochondria, but it's going to diffuse from the red blood cells through the plasma, through the interstitial fluid, and it's eventually going to move here. What's going to happen to the carbon dioxide? It's going to build up inside the mitochondria. It's going to diffuse out. It's going to diffuse through the interstitial fluid. It's going to diffuse through here, and it's going to be carried as bicarbonate on the red blood cells. And so really inside our body, what do we have? We have cells, and so red blood cells, the lining of the capillary cells, and then clearly all the cells that make up our tissues, and then we're going to have fluids. And really that's it. That's about the two things that we have. We're going to have some things obviously that are matrix made up from material that are produced by cells. But the interstitial, you can see, is very important, that interstitial fluid, because it's going to be what surrounds our cells, and it's going to be how nutrients get from the blood into our cells and waste products get back. That's interstitial fluid. It's clear. If you really want to know what it looks like, well, think about the plasma inside blood, and it's essentially the same thing. And I hope that's helpful.
He did a good job explaining that.
Very good.
I really enjoyed that. And so now, guys, you can kind of see, if we don't have that fluid, how do you get the nutrients from the capillary to the tissue? You have to have some vehicle. And the interstitial fluid is that vehicle.
Or get the wastes.
And get the waste
Back
back.
to the-
Yeah, it's a two-way system. So let's look at the filtration and reabsorption. This in here, I love this diagram here, guys. So we're looking at the colloidal osmotic pressure here within the capillary that he talked about. So what happens here? This is the kind of pressure you're going to have, about 25 micrometers Hg. And the proteins are negatively charged, which attract positive charged ions. So like, for example, sodium, potassium, H2O. And they're going to come down here, and there's going to be a higher pressure, and they're going to force that H2O to leave the capillary and come out into the interstitial area, where the region where other tissues are. And so they're going to come out there, and then that pressure, because of the interstitial space, has less pressure than what's in here. It's going to force through. And now if you look what the pressure is when you get over to the venous side, it's actually higher here than it is on the venous side. So if you look at that, you're looking at 6 micrometers out here, which is going to allow it to push through. But it'll push the water through, but some of the proteins and other fragments and the gases will go through, the water will go through, but some of the other things won't. And that's what has to get into the lymphatic vessel and be taken out and returned back to the blood that way. So this really is a great diagram how this will come out. And everything has to be reclaimed and brought back to the liver to be cleaned, recycled, reoxygenated through the lungs, and new nutrients put on through the small intestine and come back down through here, come back out. It's a complete cycle all the time. And it's these different pressures that create this to happen in your body. And so when these pressures get off because of different challenges that we'll talk about next week, then we're not reclaiming all this, and we can wind up in really bad trouble. So your interstitial fluid has a lower pressure plus lower proteins, and so that's why they have to be reclaimed through this process here. All right, here's another video.
This is amazing.
Is this fun? Okay, let's watch this video to help you understand what I just talked about.
The balance of the filtration and reabsorption forces, called net filtration pressure, determines whether blood volume remains steady or changes. At the arterial end of the capillary, filtration pressures are stronger by 10 millimeters of mercury. At the venous end, reabsorption pressures are stronger by 9 millimeters of mercury. As these typical pressures illustrate, about 90% of the fluid volume that is filtered out of the capillary is reabsorbed. The remainder drains into lymphatic capillaries to form lymph. An abnormal buildup of interstitial fluid results in swelling, known as edema. Edema is a symptom of increased blood hydrostatic pressure, or capillary permeability, decreased blood colloid osmotic pressure, or a problem with normal lymphatic drainage. Blood moves through vessels at a rate that is inversely related to total cross-sectional area. For example, capillaries, when all of them are added together, have a higher cross-sectional area than arteries and veins. Therefore, blood flows more slowly through capillaries. Slower blood velocity in the capillaries allows more time for the exchange of materials. Arteries and veins have lower total cross-sectional areas, so blood velocity is greater. Blood velocity slows as blood travels away from the heart and increases as blood leaves capillaries and returns to the heart.
Because of the differential interstitial pressure.
Pressure, exactly. You got it. Come on now. Oops. Okay. So this kind of give you an idea as you start looking at this, the Starling law, and this can get really confusing, but you can just see the different pressures. That's why I want to put this up here for you, just so you can see the different pressures. Look at the difference here. 29 micrometers of mercury versus 25, 18 versus 3. And going the other direction, you got 3 versus 8 and 25 versus 14. So you have the different pressures, so it'll move the fluids back and forth through the lymphatic system. So now let's look at the anatomy of the lymphatic system, guys. We've got today's wrapped up.
Yeah,
In fact, where are we? Oh,
we got
I'm wondering. Okay. All right. Let's just go through a couple more slides, and we'll. Oh man, yeah. Okay. We'll go through a couple more slides, and we'll have to call this. Okay. So now let's look at the superficial lymphatic capillary location. It's only 1 micrometer deep in the epidermis. That's just barely under the skin. Okay. What's its purpose? Is to collect the fluid in the interstitial space. It's the beginning of the lymphatic system. Lymph formation occurs there. 1 to 3 lymph capillaries per capillary. It contains no valves at this point. It just has gates. So this would be the outside of your skin there, as you can see, and it's just barely underneath. And it has all these gates where these are just tissue, and the lines you see is where the interstitial fluid would be, and it goes through these little gates into the lymph vessel. Now it is a single layer epithelial cell. It has anchoring filaments. Now these anchoring filaments are the ones we want to spend a lot of time talking about. I'll just give you an idea this week, but next week you'll actually see more in depth. This is where your interstitial fluid will go, and this is going to be your lymph node. Now these anchoring filaments are what is really, let me just go ahead and stop sharing here so you can see this. Okay, if I wanted to move the lymphatic fluid underneath the skin here, all I have to do is that.
really.
That. Because you have these little anchoring filaments that come up and attach to the epithelial. And when I just take your skin and just see how much I moved it. You can just see
He's
there.
not putting any.
There's no down pressure at all.
No.
All I'm doing is making enough contact to let your skin move. When I do this, those filaments are anchored to the valve, and they just open up like this, and the interstitial fluid goes in. So when you're doing lymphatic drainage, you don't have to. But now if you're doing a deep tissue massage and I get in there real hard and push down and I go like this, I break those off. Now they're not opening up because I broke them off, and it takes about 2 weeks for them to grow back.
Really?
And so that's one of the challenges that you have with deep tissue massage. If I've been in a car wreck, I want deep tissue massage because I've got to move all that stuff. If I haven't been in a car wreck or bucked off a horse or something, I'm not a real fan of deep tissue because those get broke off, and that's when you come out of massage thing and you're just hurting like crazy because you start getting this edema building up on you. So let's go back here and we'll just finish this up really quick. Next week is going to make so much. Uh-oh, I hit the wrong button. Let's try that again. Share. There we go. All right. So that's what's going on there. Now going on to the superficial capillaries and physiology, increase fluid, interstitial space. So you're going to have more increased out of here. Expands tissue space. It pulls on anchoring filaments that we just talked about. It opens initial lymph capillaries and creates this here suction effects and builds a handle for large molecules. So it's able to handle those larger molecules. So that's what those filaments are that open these here up. It's just so important to understand that. So once we get it into the lymphatic system here, and then through these capillaries, through these little small gates, it flows into, this is where we'll end tonight. It flows into what's called the pre-collectors. So you have the filaments that open up the gate, it gets into the inside of the vessel, and now you have these pre-collectors, which are bicuspid valves, and there's one every 2 to 3 millimeters that help carry the lymphatic fluid along. These connectors are superficial lymphatic capillaries, and they contain these valves. Now these valves are kind of look like this. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen again so you can kind of see. The valves kind of look like this. So this is the inside of the valve, and it's facing, my foot's down here and my heart's up here. This is how they look, and the outside of my, here, you do this. Both hands like this. Now outside here, like this, would be the capillary wall. And so as the fluid comes through, it pushes through here like this, and then the back pressure, as it tries to go back, it goes on the outside of each of these and pushes the valve closed. So that's why when you move, when I go like this, it causes that movement of fluid, and it pumps up, and gravity tries to pull it back down, and because the valves are like this, it opens up and closes because there's pore pressure on the outside of those bicuspids that holds it together. So that's why when we did the lymphatic drainage on your legs to get rid of the very close veins, what did we do? We pushed it like this
Towards the heart.
towards the heart, because we're moving it up and we let go, it comes
Oh.
back and
But
closes the valves.
Yeah, so it
Closes
doesn't
the-
stay. I mean, does it go back?
It doesn't go back, and that's how we move that up and took care of the
Oh
very
my
close veins.
gosh, that's
Makes
amazing.
sense now,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so guys, I know tonight was one of those meetings that you go, oh my word, it might have been way over your heads, but if you just kind of get the big picture of it, and we'll recap a little bit next week as we go forward and kind of put it all together with a little nice tight bow on it.
I
But-
learned a ton.
But this system is so important. It is paramount that you understand it and do your lymphatic brushing, do your lymphatic massage, use your essential oils, which we'll talk about next week, that help move this process along so amazingly. If a person can really maintain their lymphatic system, they'll have a super strong immune system. They will be healthier. They'll have better skin. They'll have less aging. I could go on and on and on. Guys, it's so important that you really understand how this lymphatic system is the most misunderstood, least trained, least talked about system of all of them. And the more I learn about it, the more I'm going, holy cow, it is so amazing, so brilliant. So guys, make sure you get the word out and join us next week so that you can see the recipe that it blow you away.
Good night.
For more information, get back with the person who sent you this amazing gift.